Well, let us start now. So welcome to this Agrarian Change seminar. I'm Jens Lager from SOAS, University of London, and I'll be chairing this session in which Lucilla Salvia will present her work on agricultural commodity chains, the case of Caporalato and contemporary dynamics of agrarian change in Italy. I'm also joined by two co-organizers, Sreya Sinha from University of Cambridge and Enrique Castagnon here from SOAS. The Agrarian Change Seminar Series is organized by the Journal of Agrarian Change and the Department of Development Studies at SOAS. This year, the seminars are, for very obvious reasons, run as webinars. You can find the full program of the series on our website, Agrarian Questions, and we will put the URL in the chat here as well. The webinar is also being live streamed on YouTube. Before we start, here are some guidelines for participants. Firstly, please keep your microphone off, except when you're actually contributing to the discussion. That increases the quality of the sound of the transmission. Secondly, we hope the webinar will be interactive, so you can write questions and comments in the chat at any point in time. This is also the case for those of you that have joined us through the YouTube live stream. There's a chat function there too. In addition to that, in the question and answer session that follows the presentation, those in the webinar can also ask live questions. Simply use the raised hand function. You'll find this function if you click on the participant button. And of course, when asking a question or making a comment, please be considerate and respectful. Finally, we're going to record the audio and the video of the session. If you do not wish to be recorded, simply don't use your audio and video. It is now time to welcome today's speaker, Lucilla Salvia from La Sapienza, University of Rome. Lucilla has a PhD in economics and social sciences from La Sapienza, and she also did an MSc in development studies here at SOAS some years ago. Her research interests include labor, agrarian relations, and global commodity chains. She has published on labor relations in Italian agriculture and migrant agricultural labors in academic journals, including in the Journal of Agrarian Change, as well as in popular articles and blogs for platforms such as Open Democracy. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Lucilla and hand over to her for a presentation. Lucilla, you've got 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have questions and answers afterwards. Over to you.
Okay. Before we get started, just I think a huge thank you to Jens Lurch and all the organizers of JOAC webinar, Enrique, and all of you for your patience and your professionalism. And thank you to all the attendees. This is for me an important chance to disseminate my research findings and discuss an issue that I think it's important to understand better. Okay, let's get started. As you know, I will talk about labor contracting that in Italy we call caporalato, an Italian expression coming from the word corporal, a military officer who commands a section or squad of soldiers. Now, labor contracting consists generally of informally recruiting and managing and controlling a team of workers, usually migrant workers, on a just-in-time basis, mainly for local labor-intensive firms inserted in production networks. It is now a well-known reality, not just in developing and emerging economies, but also a deeply rooted practice in fully developed countries, not just Italy, but also Spain, France, and Britain, the mainland of a fully functioning agribusiness capitalism, as Brass terms it. Liberal accounts tend to conflate gangmaster activity with modern slavery, conceptualizing it as an individual relationship, interpersonal relationship of domination occurring within the boundaries of illegality. Gangmasters are often depicted as unscrupulous people who take personal advantage of workers' vulnerability with the use of violence, threat, or intimidation. And in mainstream accounts, we have this rigid dichotomy between free labor relations on one side and forced slavery labor on the other side, which includes labor contracting. Gangmaster activity, therefore, is conceptualized as a deviation from the regular functioning of the economy, confined within the illegal economy. This rhetoric is very much present and emphasized in Italy, where public discourses around this issue have been dominated by a double discursive strategy. Informal labor intimidation is often depicted as a consequence of mafia infiltration in the agricultural sector, or at best connected to the greedy behavior of a few bad apple employers who rely on unscrupulous labor contractors to profit from the exploitation of farm workers, contaminating the otherwise smooth functioning of the agricultural production system. These are very widespread ideas in public discourses in Italy, strongly supported by Italian employers associations, no surprise, the state, many scholars, and trade unions. The main left-wing trade union, which has historically organized the bulk of farm workers in Italy, Fly CGL, holds that labor contracting is mainly connected with agromafia, with massive effects on the trade union's tactical approach. These narratives simply criminalize the Caporalato practice and obscures its systematicity, obscures its connection with the regular functioning of our economy, of capitalist economy. Thus, the systemic relations of power and coercion surrounding labor contracting, and in particular, its connection with the way agriculture has been reorganized over the last 30 years, since around the 1990s in Italy. The main aim of my research was to recontextualize labor contracting rather than just see it as a social aberration. I've tried to focus on it as a possible consequence of social relations, questioning those structural and relational factors that can be considered crucial in the production and reproduction of labor contracting. In other words, I've tried to critically investigate the role and rationale of informal recruiters in contemporary agrarian production. And this has led me to investigate how agriculture is organized in Lazio region and to discover the complexity of this reality of labor contracting. So today I'm going to present you the major findings of my research. More specifically, I'll talk about the role of the restructuring and the reorganization of agricultural production in Lazio region in the reemergence and proliferation of labor contracting. I will then look at the complexity of this reality and its impossibility to reduce it to a rigid caporalato forced labor connection. And linked to this, by way of conclusion, I would like to draw your attention to some reflection I've been doing recently about the role that other broader forces can have in the proliferation of labor contracting. So let's start from the agricultural restructuring in the area under examination. The research focused on the restructuring and the reorganization of fresh fruit and vegetable production in central Italy, specifically in the countryside in the south of the capital city of Rome. I've analyzed the fresh fruit and vegetable supply chain formation and configuration in Lazio region by looking at the main nodes that compose the supply chain, with the aim of identifying those social and economic drivers that lead to the use of labor contracting. Fresh fruit and vegetable production has recently become one of Italy's most dynamic sectors. According to several sources, Italy, alongside Spain, is the most important producer and exporter of fresh fruit and vegetables in Europe. Aiding mainly to Germany, France, and Austria, and among the top 6 fruit producers in the world, according to FAO. The case of kiwi fruit production is paradigmatic in this sense. Introduced in Italy as a new crop in the 1970s, it has soon become a valuable commodity. With a very short time, Italy has become the biggest producer of kiwi fruits in the world, except perhaps China, and the biggest kiwi fruit exporter along with New Zealand. And the biggest increases in hectares and production have occurred in southern Lazio. However, as Lurch has pointed out in one of his writings, there is sometimes a tendency to reduce the issue of anti-labor regimes to labor relations in export production and global commodity chains without considering that international capital and commodity circuits are also setting the norms for domestic-oriented production. And this is why in my research, I decided to focus on the so-called supermarket revolution at the national level, which also include foreign capital. I mean, foreign and national retailers in Italy that have dramatically changed the way fresh food is produced. More specifically, until very recently, around the 1990s, the main distribution channels for agricultural products in Italy were local markets and traditional food stores, which were supplied by wholesale markets. However, these, due to the rising importance of the modern distribution channels, have experienced a substantial downsizing at both national and regional level. An increasing market share of agri-food products has been absorbed directly by big retailers that in 2019 came to control more than 75% of the entire agri-food market. And as for the fruit and vegetable branch, we can see a similar scenario with the modern retail distribution controlling at least 60% of the entire market at the national level. This means that integration into agri-food chains, retail-driven agri-food chains, has come to represent the only game in town for farmers to reproduce themselves. Moreover, the retail sector is increasingly characterized by high level of concentration, with a few supermarket chains controlling most of the sales of food. The first 6 supermarkets in Italy control more than half of food distribution. One of the clearest implications of the transition from a wholesale market to the increasing hegemony of super and hypermarket chains in food distribution, specifically in fresh produce distribution, has been the forming of a new type of relationship between modern retailers and farmers, namely the so-called contract farming, which indeed has emerged as a central feature of the contemporary global agri-food system across much of the world. This increasing direct incorporation of farming into supermarket-driven production networks has taken its specific form here in Lazio region. Indeed, this rural area is still one of the Italian regions where farm fragmentation is particularly high, with more than 60% of farms that are still small-scale holdings with no more than 2 hectares of land, while less than 2% of farmers have more than 50 hectares of land. In this context of growing concentration and centralization at one hand of the agri-food chains and of persisting fragmentation of at the other hand, new organizational forms have been developed to compensate, according to the theory, for the existing imbalances of the bargaining power between the 2 poles of the commodity chain. And these are the so-called producer organization, which should be a tool to strengthen farmers' bargaining power. However, information collected during the field research depicts a more nuanced and complex reality. Indeed, the role played by producer organizations not always is addressing the farmers' weakness and strengthening the productive base vis-a-vis big buyers. It may happen that some producers organizations more firmly placed inside the commodity chain have more power to integrate the productive base, but by leveraging on the latter's contractual weakness. Indeed, as reported by some farmers, it may happen that in order to have their good placed on retail stores, they have to accept a lower price because the producers' organization, supposed to strengthen their position, is capturing a significant part of their value. And this seems to be in line with what has been found in southern Italy by Garappa and also by Perrotta, according to whom the bulk of producers' organizations are not actually the expression of producers' needs. Rather, they are often created by traders or big farmers in order to secure control on the smaller farmers and capture a higher share of value. Farmers and growers up the supply chain continue to play their central role of raw materials producers and suppliers. However, the conditions under which this happens have changed enormously following the restructuring of the agricultural sector. The growing dominance of large retailers enables them to impose strict requirements on producers. Just to give some examples, product quality is a requirement deeply affecting the production decisions of farmers. Food retailers have developed their private quality standards and certifications for food safety and quality. Apparently, according to data gathered from the fieldwork, the quality requirement demanded by big retailers seems to be even tighter than the public legislation in order to secure customer loyalty. Farmers are increasingly being asked to develop innovative product and process upgrading strategies to meet different requests from external factors of food, size, shape, color, and consistency to internal ones, levels of chemical residues and pesticides contained in products. For the production of spinach, for instance, retailers require a high level of standardization in terms of diameter and shape. According to agronomists in the region, retailers prefer the smooth-leaved baby variety that has smooth, flat leaves, smaller in size than regular spinach. And these requirements call for highly rigorous production methods, a careful selection, and diligent hand-picked harvesting. And this is why farmers are normally advised by experienced agronomists sent by producers' organization. We instruct and train the head of staff on the operation to be taken, who in turn train their own team of workers. And suppliers are obliged de facto to meet private quality standards, adapting their productive processes to them in order to not find themselves excluded from the approved suppliers list and keep themselves integrated into the value chain. Times and methods of delivery are further requirements demanded by retailers and that have come to represent an additional element of pressure for farmers. Supermarkets typically have their own distribution centers, which serves all the shops belonging to the supermarket chain. And they dictate what kind, color, shape of packaging, crate, and pallet to use. These, if not respected, together with delivery time, can be a reason to sending back the goods and even imposing a fine on farmers. So the production of fresh fruit and vegetables in the area under examination is increasingly evolving into a highly demanding production. The growing dominance of the large retailers able to capture greater market share and source products directly from farmers enables them to impose strict requirements on producers. In order to resolve their problems of integration into the value chains and remain profitable, farmers pass on the burden to the only flexible cost, labor. Specifically, one of the major strategies carried out by fresh fruit vegetable producers in southern Lazio has been to decentralize labor management to labor contractors and use an ever-increasing informal, just-in-time, cheap and disciplined labor force. Which labor force we are talking about? In the Agro-Romano and Pontine plan, the agricultural sector relies heavily on migrant labor. According to data in this area, more than 90% of the estimated total labor force in the primary sector consists of seasonal migrant workers, coming mainly from Punjab, India, and for the most part recruited by contractors. How are they recruited? During my field research, I found that labor contracting is a very complex reality, most of the time infinitely far away from the oversimplified representation of unscrupulous recruiters used to manage and control a slave labor force. In the countryside where I base my field work, you can find different profiles of labor contractors, but generally contractors in this area are usually part and parcel of the farm where they work as simple workers for most of the time, and only occasionally during peak seasons, for instance, they perform the activities of labor contractors. Kiwi fruit farmers, for instance, during peak seasons, address their need to have a flexible and ready-to-use workforce by asking for help to one of their most trusted workers to find 10 or 15 workers promptly available. They do the same work as proper recruiters, hiring friends and relatives and allocating jobs to them, training the less experienced, getting slow workers working faster, supervising the quality of the work, and solving any problems relating to the required quality standards. Rarely, occasional corporals provide transportation or accommodation. Therefore, these do not constitute sources of extra income. The entire activity of recruiting and organizing external workers for a few weeks is generally non-remunerated. Labor intermediaries do not deduct any sum from workers' wages, and rarely their activity is based on deception, violence, and coercion. The biggest prize for occasional labor contractors in these cases is respect, better if shown publicly for the beneficiaries of beneficiaries of their activity, both the employer and the workers. Respect from the employer means above all the maintenance of his position as both simple worker and occasional recruiter. If something goes wrong, he can risk losing not just his role as occasional contractor, but also his job as simple worker. And respect from workers instead of wage deduction means minimizing the possibility of being called into question as recruiter by his gang workers. So the prestige and reputation that contractors are able to develop are central features in building their entrepreneurship in order to maintain their role and position of occasional recruiter over time. In other cases, occasional labor contractor may be promoted to professional recruiter by his employer, and in these cases he earns a salary paid by the employers for it. As reported by a labor contractor working for a farm producing greenhouse fresh cut herbs, he is still part and parcel of the farm where he has worked for long years as a simple worker until his experience, his reliability, and his greater knowledge of the surrounding territory have made him eligible for the position of a farm manager. He is in charge of staff. He assigns tasks among all the workers, trains them, checks their work, and is the one who decides if, when, and for how long additional workers are needed, as long as his employer's profit is ensured. Labor contracting is therefore his main activity, and he earns a salary paid by the employers for it. In addition to his wage, the recruiter may earn extra income for all the services offered to workers, including the recruiting service, by deducting a sum from workers' wage. He may even advance some money to workers whose indebtedness can promptly be used to keep them in a situation of dependence, and this could give room to potential abuse. The contractor may behave in a despotic and violent way, controlling workers' life. Notwithstanding this, their power can never be assumed. Their power is very precarious, as their role can be easily called into question both by workers and employers. Indeed, the labor contractor that I have just described that acted despotically is indeed the only unscrupulous recruiter I've met, and he was removed from the farm where he worked after workers' protest. Sometimes there are workers that enter into a dependency relationship with their recruiter, saying that it is okay, it's fair to pay recruiters because they are offering a service, a very important service. So the Caporalato practice in the rural areas in southern Lazio could be a tyrannical, lucrative activity perpetrated by unscrupulous people who take personal advantage of workers' vulnerability. But this is quite an exception. Most of the time, it is a disguised practice of providing a cheap and exploitable labor power without the explicit use of violence, threats, or intimidation. Employer and the labor contractors do not necessarily need to rely on unfree forms of labor to have a guaranteed supply of cheap, disposable labor force. As mentioned before, some workers may find themselves in a direct dependency relationship with their recruiters, mainly due to their indebtedness, which would have forced them to accept extreme labor condition. However, also free labor, that is labor only compelled by other kind of coercion, we can say, to be recruited and organized by labor contractors, share with the former a wide set of characteristics concerning conditions of work and pay, long working days, about 12 hours a day, and an average pay of 30 euros per day without any contract or with a fake part-time contract, and a half-hour lunch break with the obligation to get food and drink by himself. By way of conclusion, to summarize my presentation, we can say that, first of all, labor contracting can be considered a structural form of labor exploitation and disciplining, coming from network pressures, a result of how different fractions of capital tend to secure their interests. The proliferation of labor contracting practices is not only the result of local strategies carried out by farmers to maintain their profitability, but it is also pushed. It is also pushed by the way leading firms outsource their activities in contemporary global networks. It is a phenomenon deeply embedded in the way food is produced, a phenomenon deeply embedded in the production system. It is a structural feature of it, not a deviation from it. Secondly, the oversimplified and one-dimensional representation of contractors as unscrupulous people who control and take advantage of a slave labor force is a political construction in the service of the mainstream account that wants to exceptionalize the issue, treating it as an anomaly. Labor contracting is a complex and multiform reality, and it involves different forms and degrees of coercion and freedom and exploitation, different forms and degrees. And I would like to draw your attention to this last point and share with you this reflection, which I shall mention briefly. We have seen that the relationship between recruiters and workers is not just a relationship marked by deception, fear, and coercion, but more than often, workers actively search for recruiters, and sometimes they think it is right to pay them for the service they offer. There are indeed plenty of migrant food loose workers who are ready, obliged to undertake the highly exploitable work for capitalist agriculture. Most workers look to recruiters as key figures for the fulfillment of their survival needs. Why, on the one hand, the Caporalato system emerged first as a response to the needs of employers, it also meets the need of the most vulnerable workers particularly migrants, in search of a certain degree of labor stability, labor security. We should then ask ourselves what crafts workers' consent, and this calls for an analysis of other broader disciplining and control forces acting upon migrant workers' disposability by crafting their consent. We need to take into consideration, for instance, all those processes of devaluation of labor, which play as disciplining forces upon workers. I'm referring here to the increasingly severe restrictive and selective migration legislation, increasing racialization and criminalisation of undocumented migrants, labor markets prioritizing flexibility over workers' rights. These are just a few examples that need further analysis and research, but that force themselves to go beyond the narrow criminological focus. And above all, due to the current criminological focus on the practices of informal market intermediaries, a widespread assumption, even among more politically progressive circles, is that gangmaster system flourishes where the state does not reach, hence overlooking the fundamental role that the state plays in shaping the condition for the emergence and reproduction of Caporalato. The state is indeed a central actor in the reemergence of Caporalato. It has played a key role in the specific configuration of the fresh food supply chain in Lazio region by pursuing for several years an agrarian policy of peasantization to reduce the number of agricultural workers who were the most politically radical, who gave birth to the labor movement, to the communist movement in Italy. Today, we know the role of small-scale farming in the reproduction of Caporalato. And on the other hand, the state plays a central role also in the formation and construction of a socially specific labor force to put at work on particular terms and conditions. The way of housing migrants is a case in point. Institutional accommodations are housing arrangements which the Italian state organizes every year for seasonal migrant workers during peak agricultural seasons near the main agricultural area. There is practically no planning about how to provide decent housing solution to migrant workers. Rather, the issue is always tackled with an emergency approach every year. Though seasonal migrant workers are the main workforce for the Italian agriculture for several decades now, it follows that these accommodations are almost never proper housing. Rather, most of the times they are a sort of refugee-like camp. These accommodations usually offer just the very minimum standards of living and housing, and often are quasi-militarized sites with a strict control over who gets in and out. And these accommodations are, in different ways, infrastructures of degraded reproduction, an expression used by Schling to name dormitories in the Czech Republic, and similarly to the Czech dormitories serving the manufacturing sector. Housing arrangements for migrant workers in the Italian agriculture are spaces which offer just a constricted and humiliating reproduction, pushing workers into a permanent state of mobility and circulation, and therefore of precariousness, contributing to the creation of an industry of disposable workforce.
Thank you, Salvia. That was really. Have you finished? If I could ask, yes.
Yes, yeah, I finished.
Thanks. So that was really, really interesting, and there's so many points in this that is worth discussing further for sure. I mean, I particularly well, I liked it. I thought it was interesting from the way you showed how the link between industrialized modern capitalism in agriculture to the particular kind of labor regime is so clear. That it is not an ancient type of labor relations that is surviving. It is an active part of modern capitalism. And I thought your whole discussion around the labor contractors were hugely interesting, and it reminded me of papers by from India where I work, by people like David Picheri, that argues that labor contractors today in the parts of India where he have worked are local workers that graduate, and that for local workers their best hope income-wise is one day to be able to become a local level labor contractor. That is how they can see an economic improvements for themselves. And I just wondered, in relation to what you discussed here, if when you say that labor contractors gain respect from others, is that part of, and that some of them end up as professional recruiters, is this respect, is that part of what you need to become a local an employed recruiter? Is there, do recruiters, informal recruiters, set out with a hope to become professional recruiters? Is there such a link here that is in a sense their payment, that they have a hope of progression? So that is one question. If I can just put one more to you. Well, I thought your last discussion of how we really need to understand labor, and labor as migrants, and that are maybe even refugees or live in camps and have no rights, that is necessary to understand these labor relations. The criminalisation of labor is an important part of it. I could. So to what extent are the laborers you studied, the Punjabi laborers, living and working under such condition? Are they criminalized? Are they immigrants with no rights? Are they refugees? And I'm asking so also because I've, as many others probably have, I have read from other parts of Italy where the workforce are so-called refugees, or are refugees from that have come through Libya, and that needs to be able to gain some work in order to maintain the right to stay in Italy. So, and therefore they are at the mercy of their employers to an extreme extent. So it would be interesting to know more about the Punjabi workers and their conditions. What forces them to work under these conditions that you described here? So these are my two opening questions, and of course I should have said, so I'm now kicking off the question and answer session, and by putting these questions, I hope we can start the session. People can write questions, and they can also raise their hand and ask questions. So, but let us hear your comments to my questions, and then we will go on to the wider question and answer session. Thanks.
Okay. As for the first question about the respect and if this is an important element for for become a professional recruiter. We've just said that the biggest price for occasional laborers, for occasional labor contractors is respect. This does not mean that they are weak figures. They may have upward aspiration from occasional to professional contractors. Therefore, they strive to ensure the monopoly of their intermediary activity. And this is why, yes, respect, prestige, reputation they are central features in building this entrepreneurship and become professional recruiters. The second question about difference between Punjab workers and African. This is very interesting because it's about how actually it touched an important feature, that is how racism entered this discussion. I mean, migrant workers in southern Lazio come mainly from Punjab, India. Punjab is often described as primarily an agricultural land. However, what I found is that many migrants were at their very first experience in agriculture here in Italy. They started working in agriculture here. What seems to count are job opportunities in the receiving country here in Italy, and our employers select their labor force according to criteria inspired by business strategies, but above all by their need of discipline and control. And this and they rely on the social construction of differences among migrants and natives, and among migrants coming from different countries. So we have on the one hand a social construction according to which migrants do jobs that natives don't want to do anymore. And this first racial fragmentation between native and migrant workers is reinforced by employers' belief that migrants coming from the third world, where there is nothing but primitive agriculture, are used to hard and living conditions, hard work and living conditions. On the other hand, employers do a further selection of migrant workers, a further rational fragmentation among migrant workers here in Lazio, I say. Employers in Lazio region differentiate Punjabi Indian migrant workers from African migrant workers. Unlike Africans that, according to employers, represent the dangerous class, Indians are represented as good workers and peaceful individuals. And this stereotypization is reproduced by Punjabi migrants themselves that internalize this stigmatization, accepting extreme labor condition to have an opportunity to work. I can't hear you.
No, that is really interesting, and I think it speaks to many other contexts where workers are also divided and can be divided through divide and rule policies. And so, no, that is really interesting. And I would have loved to have asked you more, and maybe I can. But first, we have a speaker here called Me1. I do not know who Me1 is, but Me1, could you put your question, please?
Me, I think it's me. I'm so sorry. I never changed the personal name and account. Thank you very much, Lucilla, for this wonderful presentation. I hope you can see me well. I'm precarious on a tablet, but I hope I managed to convey my questions. And in fact, first of all, managed to convey my appreciation for for the presentation, which I thought it was great and interesting across a variety of themes and debates that I'm also trying to follow somehow. I guess I have a couple of questions. The first one relates to the specificity of the region you studied compared to the rest of Italy. And again, I have a series of more specific questions that would allow me to think whether the kind of processes that you study are very peculiar to that region in Lazio or are broader. And I'm thinking, for example, one on actually the question that I thought you didn't answer from Jens, which is what was the legal status of those workers? And in a sense, okay, they come from Punjab, but do they have a 5-year permit? Are they Italian citizens? Are they on a 6-month temporary protection, permesso di soggiorno, and so on? Because I think that matters quite a lot in terms of managing and establishing those relations between contractors and workers. And similarly, I would like to know the nationality of these contractors. In the region that I studied, it was actually foreigners themselves who had gone through, as very much as you were saying, through those contractual relations, and in acquiring citizenship, managed to, so it was more like a legal status that allowed them to graduate to gangmaster or caporale as such. And also, again, insisting on that specificity or not, I mean, I fully got your point about the mafia and it shouldn't be considered mafia. And I thought you were making a point about Marco Ormizzolo's books that talk about the regions that you study as well. But in the region that I studied, Marche, I mean, we may not call it mafia, but it was a pretty well organized and omertoso way of arranging contracts. So put differently, at times I felt that you were portraying those gangmasters as some kind of entrepreneurs, while I wonder whether, or the extent to which, I mean, there is a system organizing gangmasters themselves and so on. But broadly, all these questions and more that I have relate to what is specific about the Lazio region, or indeed the kiwi production, which, if I understood correctly, is the one that you studied, compared to other regions in Italy.
Thanks, Paolo, also for managing both to talk and to balance your screen precariously. Well done. Lucilla, please, there's a couple of issues there for you to respond to.
Okay. For the first question, in comparison with other areas in Italy, I'm talking about a kind of labor contracting that is, I do not consider a system. Okay, as I said, is a disguised practice of bring cheap and exploitable labor to employers. And this is also confirmed by other studies in the area of Italy, in the Parmesan cheese value chain within the province of Reggio Emilia, northern central Italy, by Bertolani and Azzervoli, and also in the tomato chain in Puglia by Perotta. They also found that the Caporalato system is not all. It's an exception that is a system that use violence, threat, intimidation, and workers' wage deduction. This is for the first question. The second one about the legal status. In Lazio region, we don't have refugee laborers. we have most of them are temporary labor workers and undocumented workers. And I think this is an important element to take into consideration to support my thesis that it's not a system, but it's just a practice, because their power is very precarious because of their legal status. They can lose their job if they do not act as proper recruiters, and this is why they need to base their activity on respect and not on deduction, on wage deduction, because they need to build a trust relationship with their workers, because their job, their permanence in Italy is in question. And I don't know if I maybe I asked to your third question about why I think that it's not a system. Did I?
Paolo?
Yes.
But is it so? Is this then because the contract? Because it seems there's a different power relation between laborers and contractors then, because you are arguing that contractors depend more on laborers, where in a sense the standard view and what Paolo's fieldwork seems to show is the opposite. The strong recruiters and laborers who are in dire need of the employment. And you seem to argue that it's more the other way around.
I mean, their position and their role is very precarious, because they can be put into question by both workers and employers. So it's a very precarious equilibrium. I don't know how to explain better this point.
But that's fine. We can leave it there. It's a precarious equilibrium. I think that is nicely put. So I'm sure we may return to it later in other questions. We'll see. Thanks. Let us continue with the questions. I have a couple of hands still on the list here. Alessandra Zadri is the next.
Thanks. Jens, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Lucilla. It's a pleasure to see you presenting, and it's great research. I have two questions. One perhaps is a bit linked to Paolo's, but from the point of view of agrarian transitions. And the second relates to distrust between contractors and workers that you depict. And actually, I have to say, it's extremely difficult to do research that focus on contractors. So everybody that does should be congratulated. They're possibly the most difficult target group to catch. At least this has been my experience. The first relates to this, what your case actually suggests. And I think Paolo tries to address the question through the lens of migration. Well, my I guess my queries would be in relation to the actual location vis-a-vis Italians' agrarian transition. Now, we have reference to the so-called quite famous three Italies because we did have very different types of agrarian trajectories, which in a sense are then reproduced today if we look both at the evolution of agrarian systems and agrarian production, as well as the type of land use and type of labor forces seems to be reproduced. So although I'm sympathetic to your argument that says, okay, this is really not a temporary evil or like an exception, this is structural. But at the same time, because you have different trajectories of agrarian transformation in Italy, you can have that structurally this system manifests itself in a variety of, right?
I didn't hear you, sorry.
There seemed to be music somewhere. Yeah.
Yes.
There seemed to
Type
be
music,
not
but I'm not sure we can get rid of it. I can't see who.
yeah.
It's not here. I can tell you. I haven't got music on.
Okay, so basically what I'm saying is those that argue that contracting is linked to criminality in the South come from a very sort of long tradition of highlighting the links between criminality and agriculture in the South. This is not the case for the zone that you're looking at. So what I'm saying is contracting itself is embedded in different agrarian trajectories. So in a sense, yes, it's true what you're saying, that your case suggests that this link to criminality should be challenged, but perhaps your argument cannot be scaled up when it comes to the South. And it's fair to say that because structurally, these are all like different instances in a very diverse trajectory of Italy, or at least if you can say something about the links between arguments on contracting and the different agrarian trajectories that you see. The second question, I don't know, Jens, I see you moving. The second question I had relates to this trust you referred to between contractors and workers. And you can...
Alessandra's back.
Yes.
We didn't hear I didn't hear the last 30 seconds, certainly.
Okay. So anyway, the first question is, can you please contextualize within a context of different agrarian transition in Italy, because they're hugely diverse. So center, Lazio that you're looking at and Puglia have very little in common in terms of agrarian transition. Second is, when you point at trust among contractors, these are generally very sort of loaded terms contractors use, but they can anyway conceal relations of oppression for workers. For instance, the fact that you might depend on a contractor to find your accommodation, even if the contractor doesn't cash in, that it means that it's a process of reproductive dependence which is generated. So I understand for the contractor the issue is trust building, but for the worker can be something very different. So if you can comment on that, thank you.
Okay, as for the first question, yes, I know that there are very different agrarian trajectories in Italy. If you take southern Italy, for instance, there you have actually not small scale farming. They are actually bigger in size. However, and I know that criminality can have a role in these, but I studied the works of other scholars, and they actually says that also in southern Italy, the main question, the main issue is how agriculture has been reorganized over the last few years, because also tomato production and also processed tomato production is inside it's been included in commodity chains driven by retailers, Perotto, for instance, there's a difference between southern Italy and northern Italy in tomato production. Apparently, tomato production in northern Italy is more efficient. I mean, for instance, there isn't a problem of producers' organization that take advantage from smaller farmers. But anyway, he says that even that there is a problem of labor contracting that is not directly connected with criminality, that there can be this problem, but he found that there are similarities because of the way agriculture is organized, and there are similar effects, notwithstanding the different trajectories of agriculture. And the second question, I can't remember the second question.
The second question was about trust, the fact that you can
about trust, yes,
trust in a very oppressive process.
Yes, no, you're right. I mean, I know that there is a difference between worker and occasional recruiter, that worker can leave this trust as an oppression, actually. I mean, I know that the labor contractor has a role in the reproduction of workers' vulnerability and insecurity, because for his part, he needs to have a disciplined and a controlled workforce for being promoted as occasional recruiter over time, and maybe as a professional recruiter. So I know that maybe he do not provide accommodation and transportation, but he needs to control his workforce. This is why, in a sense, workers they actually are in a they can leave oppressive situation because of this.
thanks, and it's this is a debate which, again, there's so much more to it. So I hope we can continue it. But before that, I think it's time to go to my co-hosts and hear if they have received any questions, and if they have any questions they wish to put as well. Now, even before that, let me just, for the benefit of those that haven't got access to the chat, let me just say that one of the participants, Gaurav Bansal, writes that he, in his fieldwork in Punjab, have come across farmers that have worked in Italy, and he finishes by saying it is extremely interesting to see the movement of what in Punjab are decent-sized farmers, to the movement of them to become trusted workers, but workers in Italy and then back again. The movement from a position of a dominant caste and class to hardworking and loyal workers was extremely interesting. So an excellent comment that fleshes out who these workers are as well. Now let us go to Shreya.
Thanks, Jens. And there's one question from Survi Nayak, who is asking, thank you for this fascinating presentation. I was wondering regarding the conditions that qualifies an occasional labor contractor to become professional labor contractor, if there are any. And secondly, is there any change in the nature of relation between the contractor and the worker when they become professional labor contractors?
To be clear, when I say professional contractors, I put into inverted commas, because professional contractors is not here in Italy, is not a recognized figure, a recognized role. As in Britain, for instance, professional recruiter is just someone that is still informal, okay, it's illegal, and is paid by employer to do this kind of job, recruiting, organizing, and controlling a squad, a group of workers. When we talk about this passage between from occasional to professional labor contractor, I mean, I'm just saying that the first one is just something that also simple workers can do during peak seasons, for instance, and on the other side we have professional recruiters, but again, it's a figure just that just employers and the workers know that they are professional recruiters.
Shreya?
Okay, thanks. I just had a question of my own that I thought I'll pose to Lucilla, which is that I think at some point in the talk you did mention that there's a kind of mass of floating, footloose sort of migrant labor, and then on the other hand, even though you've stressed that the contractor has kind of a precarious power, but it sort of rests on the fact that the worker can possibly move, leave the contractor. And I just wonder how that is reconciled. If there is really a large, there is a mass of sort of floating migrant labor, it almost sounds like there is many more workers than there are contractors, and it wouldn't be quite that easy to just move between contractors. And I just wondered if you could clarify that.
Okay. In the Lazio region, the migrants are mainly settled migrants, and this is different from Africans. When I was talking about footloose laborers, I was referring to Africans mainly, because the way the state arranged their housings is a way to make them permanently footloose labor. Well, here in Lazio region, actually they have settled. They have built a settlement. They have built temples, two Gurdwara temples. So yes, there is a difference. Even though also here in the Lazio region, according to the new arrivals, they are they are the ones that they enter into this kind of relationship. They are gang workers, and they actually at the very for the first times they move between Lazio and there is another settlement in the north of Italy. So there is this kind of movement, but is of a lesser extent than compared to Africans.
Okay, let us go on to Enrique. Have you got any? Have you received any questions, or would you like to ask a question yourself?
Yes, thank you. It's actually my question, if that's okay. Thank you, Lucilla, for the presentation. I also enjoyed it. I think it's a very interesting case. So my question relates to this difference that you established between these two types of workers, the ones coming from Punjab and the African workers. You mentioned that the African workers are perceived as less submissive, a bit more dangerous. So I just would like to know a bit more of the history behind those stereotypes. Why is it that Punjab workers are perceived as much more calm, people that are easy to work with? And why is it that workers coming from Africa have this different stereotype? What's the history behind? I'm just wondering if you can comment on that.
Well, I really I don't know. Well, I can say that it's a very widespread stereotypes. Also in the Parmesan chain, researchers have found that employers thinks that Punjab workers are peaceful individuals, and because they are people that they are accustomed to work the land, so they think that in the Parmesan value chain, they also think that employers think that they have a kind of relationship with the cows, because they think that for Punjab workers, cows are considered holy, and it's all make up. I mean, it's a cultural construction about Punjabi workers. I think to have a peaceful labor force, because, well, actually, Punjabi people, indeed they are I found that they are not so peaceful. I mean, they are engaged in class-based section. In they do struggles, okay, class struggles, labor struggles. So I think it's a strategy employed by used by employers to keep them quiet.
Yes, lavish them with praise and say this is what they should be in order to maintain their job. No, yes, there's so much in there. Now, Shapanatnan has a question.
Yes, you said at one point that the state is a central actor in the reproduction of the gangmaster system. Later on, you said that this system arises wherever the state cannot reach. Now, is the role of the state simply confined to the fact that it does not reach far enough? Or did you mean something more in terms of state policy and actions? And along with that, you also made a comment about agrarian policy leading to conversion of workers into, I could not catch whether you said repeasantization or depeasantization in relation to workers. And I wonder if you could clarify that.
Okay. As for the first question, I said that the state is a key, plays a key role in the proliferation of labor contracting, because I think he shaped the conditions for the proliferation of labor contracting. And I mentioned the way of housing migrants, but for instance, also the Italian state governance of migration is a case in point. For instance, the current labor shortage crisis for the agricultural sector due to the COVID emergency has reemerged an old-fashioned argument about local and migrant labor. Working in the agricultural sector is not for all. Some types of jobs are better suited to certain groups of people than others. And this social construction is heavily fueled by the legal construction of migrant workers as others suitable for hard and degrading labor. I mean, all the public debate around the emergency of labor shortage during the pandemic crisis and the subsequent measures taken to face it have been a vivid example of how the state takes part in the construction of a specific vulnerable labor force. The Italian state has opted for temporary harvest permits for irregular migrants present on the Italian territory. So these measures, in line with all the previous national policies on migration, shapes the process of labor surplus extraction by constructing migrant workers as others, defined as irregular and deportable, hence enhancing workers' insecurity, and then crafting their disposability. For the the peasantization measure. Even here, the state, also in this case, the state is plays a central role in the way agrarian, in the way agriculture has been reorganized. I mean, the fascist state during the 1940s, 1930s, 40s has pursued this kind of policy of sbracciantizzazione, which aim at reducing the number of agricultural workers, braccianti, which were the most politically radical. They were the bulk of the labor movement in Italy. And this was pursued through a process of repeasantization of agriculture, with the reconstitution of small family farms. And after the fall of the fascist regime, the bourgeois democratic state kept pursuing the same agrarian policy of peasantization. In this way, when I say peasantization is actually the formation of small-scale farming. Okay, so they are more linked to the land, and in a way, this policy has the potent. As privatized, as I don't know, I would say. I mean, as I say, agricultural workers were the bulk of the labor movement. So not peasants. So transforming them as small-scale farming is to, in a way, take away power to labor movement.
I understand that that it was politically useful in some sense to reduce workers who were more politicized, more potentially volatile, and have in their place more peasants who presumably were less militant and less problematic in a political sense. But what was the mechanisms used for this peasantization of kind of reducing the proportion of agriculture workers, increasing the proportion of small-scale peasant producers? That is not very clear, both in terms of the present situation and also the historical reference to the fascist period. What were these mechanisms, or did these mechanisms change over time?
There were many policies put in play by the state, incentives to acquire land. It was one of these kind of a measure. So during that period, it was a strategy to link workers to the land, to give incentives in this sense.
Maybe we should stop that there. I mean, there's it's so interesting that if it was workers that got that position, they've obviously turned on their own kin, on where they come from, by the way they're organizing production now. So it is another point that we could have a whole seminar on. The relationship between smallholders and workers, when smallholders are part of industrialized capitalism and under the pressures that come straight from the top within those chains. But let us leave it there for now. I have a last question from my side, which is returning to the gangmasters, labor recruiters. And it's about their position between the employers and the workers, because in some places labor unions seek to organize gangmasters along with workers. And I have seen the argument in some parts of India that you can only mobilize workers if you can mobilize the gangmasters. So there the argument is clearly that the gangmasters are not workers, but they are close enough. They're enough workers, they're enough by way of workers to be the ones that can drive action. And of course, elsewhere you see action against gangmasters. So what have you come across struggles, actions, and what has the position of the gangmasters been?
Very interesting, because yes, I come across this kind of, as I said before, class action against gangmaster, but I also came across a kind of class action where gangmasters took workers' sides. So what I can say is that the rigid association Caporalato forced labor does not allow for an understanding of the struggles that gang workers are actually involved in. So they are not deproletarianized, but official confederate unions, CGL for instance, have so far been unable to intercept these struggles for different reasons. One of these, probably the most important, is the shift away from a militancy and conflictual approach toward a bargaining approach based on class harmony in the national interest since the 1970s, more or less. And official trade unions' incapacity to accommodate migrant workers' demands as force migrant workers to look for informal means to protect themselves. So in southern Italy, for instance, but also in northern Italy, you can find unofficial migrant worker groups, usually based on the workers' place of origin, that protect members in an ad hoc way, using means such as wildcat strikes, militant protest, blockades, and they regularly experience state repression. And in the Lazio region as well, in the rural area under examination, you can find similar instances, but at the firm level. So they are substantially invisible. During my research, as I said, there were action in different firms carried out by gang workers to remove rude, tyrannical gangmasters, or to protest against pay cut decided suddenly by the employer, and with the involvement of gangmaster taking workers' sides. most of them were unsuccessful, but I mean, these instances say us that workers are not passive victims. They do not passively adapt to economic imperatives.
No, that is, yeah. Well, that seems really clear.
Yeah.
Manish, was that a hand? Manish?
Yeah. Hi, Lucilla. Thanks for the presentation. And I think partially Jens has touched upon the question which was on my mind. So my research is actually about migrant workers who travel from East India and they circulate within India to work in the construction sector. And primarily the sector is dominated by thekedars, I mean, as they call it in India, labor contractors. But I'm quite interested, and this is following on from Jens's question about this chain of relation between the supermarket, the gangmaster, and the workers. And how does this chain actually create and also suppress conditions of protest? That is one. And I think partially I have got a response from your response to Jens's question. And I'm also curious to understand the method that you adopted to, say, get in touch with contractors and pursue your conversations, and were they approachable, and how did you find your interaction with them happening on the ground? Yeah.
Okay. About the first question, again, I had to the answer to Lurch is that the struggle. I talk about the struggles at the firm level in the Lazio region, and well, these struggle actually here in Lazio region are for the most part invisible, so they do not receive state repression, as happens instead in southern Italy, where there are militants and other workers, unofficial workers organization that do actions not only at firm levels, and they receive state repressions, but the struggles at the firm level here in Lazio region do not receive any support by trade unionists and left-wing militants. They have organizational experience that can be used to enhance workers' associational power. And I think the point is that we need to reconceptualize what development means. Labor struggles against exploitation by capital are developmental because they can deliver improvements to workers' livelihoods, and the levels of repression of action like strikes and blockades undertaken by informal labor organization in the south of Italy can only be explained by the fact that the state and capital want to relegate human development to second place and prioritize capital accumulation. And the second one is about the methods I used to approach labor contractors. And okay, I spent a lot of time in a Gurdwara temple, that is the place where most of negotiation take place. And I built a trusted relationship with them, and sometimes I have been helped by local natives, because as you know, labor contractors they they are the one that better knows the territory and the people. They tell me everything without apparently no problem. Maybe because this is maybe another element to take into consideration, the fact that they actually are the only link between local people and migrant workers, and this is another element of prestige for us, for them. So they talk with natives without apparently no problems if they have built this trusted relationship. I mean.
Okay, I think this is a good time to call this to a close. Unless there are any last minute questions, then I think we should now thank Lucilla for this excellent presentation and for all the answers to our many questions. It's been a very lively question and answer session, and I think that shows the relevance of the issues that were dealt with here, the relevance in relation to what goes on in Italy, but well beyond that. So thanks once more for an excellent presentation. And you can only hear me, so but
thank you.
And let me also say that this whole session will be available on our YouTube channel, and we will also in due course have 10 minutes interviews with Lucilla, as it were, but also with all previous speakers available on our Agrarian Change channel. So people who won't go through the 2 hours can get the 10 minutes version instead there. Now, the only thing I have left to say is that our next seminar is at the 2nd of December, same time, same place. And it is Theo Balve from the Colgate University in New York that will talk on narco frontiers and magical Marxism, agrarian change on drugs. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much for this time, and good night or good evening.
Thank
you.